Welcome to Ethoria Channel.
This isn't a story for your eyes. No images, no decoration, just a voice. And silence that doesn't resist it. If it helps, the words will follow the voice on screen. Stay. Because maybe it's time to pause. To stop. Consuming. And start feeling. To be here, without distraction. Alone with yourself. You don't have to solve anything now. Just allow yourself to hear the questions you usually quiet. Questions about meaning, about your truth, about who you are when no one's watching. Stop. Right here, in this moment. Look into the camera, into your own eyes, and ask yourself, what part of myself have I been most afraid to let others see? Sit with that question. Don't answer immediately. Let it breathe in you. Now ask, what if this isn't my weakness? What if this is my hidden power? The Art of Disappearing, a philosophical journey to empowerment. Episode 4. Why and how to integrate your shadow, the dark parts that hold your greatest power. Previously on The Archaeology of Self. First part, we discovered who we are. In the second, we excavated our authentic layers. In the third, we learned to disappear strategically to protect our authenticity. Episode 1 was about recognizing you're buried. Episode 2 gave you the excavation map. Episode 3 taught you strategic protection. Episode 4 reveals your hidden treasure. You think you know yourself, but there's a part of you that you've been running from your entire life. Not your flaws, not your mistakes, your power. The parts of you that were too much, too intense, too threatening for others to handle. So you buried them, called them shameful, made them invisible. What if everything you've been taught to hide about yourself is exactly what the world needs most? Meet Zara, successful therapist, calm, composed, always in control. She helped others with their anger while suppressing her own for 30 years. Until the day her father died, and she couldn't cry at his funeral. That's when she realized she hadn't just buried her anger. She'd buried her entire emotional range, her passion, her fire, her ability to feel deeply. In trying to be appropriate, she'd become a ghost of herself. Her shadow wasn't her enemy. It was her missing power. Here's what psychology won't tell you about shadow work. The parts of yourself you've disowned aren't broken. They're your buried treasure. And until you excavate them, you'll always be living at half capacity. Carl Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." But here's what Jung really meant. Your shadow isn't your dark side. It's your disowned power. Episode mantra: my darkness is not my enemy, it's my buried strength. Pause the video right now. Don't scroll. Write down one part of you you've always hidden. This is your moment of reckoning. The discovery: why you became your own archaeologist's worst enemy. Most people think shadow work is about confronting their bad qualities. That's not shadow work, that's self-flagellation. Real shadow work is about reclaiming the parts of yourself that others couldn't handle, so you learn to bury them alive. Consider the psychology of childhood conditioning. You were born with a full spectrum of human expression: anger, joy, sadness, sexuality, aggression, tenderness, wildness, stillness, all natural, all necessary, all part of your authentic self. But somewhere along the way, certain parts of you became unacceptable. Maybe your anger was too scary for your anxious parents, so you learned to swallow it. Maybe your joy was too loud for your depressed household, so you learned to dim it. Maybe your sexuality was too threatening for your conservative family, so you learned to shame it. Maybe your ambition was too intimidating for your insecure friends, so you learned to minimize it. Dr. John Bradshaw's research on toxic shame reveals we don't just hide our shadows from others, we hide them from ourselves. The parts of us that receive disapproval, punishment, or abandonment when expressed get banished to what Jung called the personal unconscious. But here's the psychological reality. Energy doesn't disappear. It goes underground. Your buried anger becomes depression. Your buried sexuality becomes obsession or numbness. Your buried power becomes people-pleasing. Your buried authenticity becomes performance. Think of Kai, a gentle, accommodating man who prided himself on never getting angry. He was the peacekeeper in every relationship, the mediator in every conflict. But his buried anger leaked out as passive aggression, sarcasm, and chronic resentment. His shadow wasn't the anger itself. It was his disowned ability to set boundaries, stand up for himself, and say no when something violated his values. When Kai finally excavated his shadow anger, he didn't become an aggressive person. He became an assertive one. His buried fire became his power to protect what mattered to him. The shadow paradox. The qualities you most judge in others are often the disowned qualities in yourself. The person who irritates you with their selfishness might be showing you your buried ability to prioritize your own needs. The person who triggers you with their attention-seeking might be reflecting your buried desire to be seen and valued. But here's the flip side, the shadow trap that's just as dangerous. Consider Amir, a man who prided himself on being brutally honest and unapologetically aggressive. He thought this was authenticity. But Amir wasn't integrated, he was identified with his shadow. His aggression wasn't conscious power, it was unconscious wounding expressing itself. Amir used his authentic anger to avoid vulnerability. He used his honest communication to justify cruelty. He was hiding his gentleness, his need for connection, his fear of being truly seen behind a mask of shadow expression. True integration isn't about becoming your shadow. It's about consciously choosing when and how to express all aspects of yourself. This isn't about becoming everything you've suppressed. It's about integrating these energies consciously rather than having them leak out unconsciously. Consider the neuroscience. When we suppress aspects of ourselves, we create what Dr. Daniel Siegel calls neural integration deficits. Parts of our brain become disconnected from conscious awareness. Shadow integration is literally rewiring your neural pathways to include the full spectrum of your humanity. The shadow cartography. 5 types of buried power. Just as episodes 2 and 3 mapped specific layers and types, Episode 4 maps the 5 primary categories of shadow material that most people bury. Unlike your dark side, these are your disowned powers. Type 1. Emotional shadow. The feelings you learned weren't safe to feel. Type 2. Aggressive shadow. The power you learned wasn't safe to use. Type 3. Sexual shadow. The aliveness you learned wasn't safe to express. Type 4. Creative shadow. The uniqueness you learned wasn't safe to show. Type 5. Spiritual shadow. The wisdom you learned wasn't safe to claim. Type 1. Emotional shadow. The feelings you buried to be loved. What it looks like. Suppressed. Anger that leaks out as depression or passive aggression. Buried sadness that creates emotional numbness. Hidden fear that manifests as control or rigidity. Disowned joy that results in chronic dissatisfaction. The psychological reality. Emotions aren't positive or negative, they're information. When you bury emotional intelligence, you lose access to crucial data about your environment, relationships, and needs. Case study. Priya grew up in a household where negative emotions weren't allowed. Her mother's motto was, "If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all." Priya learned to bury her anger, sadness, and fear so deeply that by age 35, she felt emotionally flat. She described it as living life through a filter. Everything seemed muted, distant, like I was watching my life instead of living it. When Priya began excavating her emotional shadow, she didn't become an emotional mess. She became emotionally intelligent. Her buried anger revealed where her boundaries had been violated. Her buried sadness revealed where she needed to grieve losses she'd never processed. Her buried fear revealed where she needed to pay attention to real dangers she'd been ignoring. The integration practice. Priya started what she called emotional archaeology, spending 10 minutes each morning asking, "What am I feeling that I'm not allowing myself to feel?" Instead of judging the emotions, she treated them as information. Shadow integration tool, the feeling excavation. Daily practice. When you notice emotional numbness or flatness, ask, "What emotion am I avoiding? What would this emotion tell me if I listened to it? How is this buried emotion trying to protect or inform me?" Master level. You can feel the full range of human emotions without being overwhelmed by them or having to act on all of them. Your emotions become intelligence rather than reactivity. Type 2. Aggressive shadow. The power you learned was dangerous. What it looks like. Suppressed assertiveness that becomes people-pleasing. Buried boundaries that result in constant violation. Hidden competitive drive that manifests as self-sabotage. Disowned protective instincts that leave you vulnerable. The psychological reality. Healthy aggression isn't violence, it's life force. It's your ability to move toward what you want and away from what harms you. When you bury this energy, you become passive, resentful, and energetically depleted. Case study. Tyrone was raised by a violent father and a passive mother. He learned that any expression of strength, assertion, or competitive drive was just like Dad. So he buried his entire aggressive shadow, becoming what he called aggressively nice. The result? He was promoted over repeatedly at work, taken advantage of in relationships, and constantly exhausted from saying yes when he meant no. His buried aggression leaked out as passive-aggressive comments, chronic lateness, and secretly rooting for other people to fail. When Tyrone excavated his aggressive shadow, he discovered it wasn't violence. It was power. The power to compete fairly, to protect what mattered to him, to assert his needs without apologizing. The integration practice. Tyrone learned to distinguish between healthy assertion and toxic aggression. He started saying no without explanations, competing openly for opportunities he wanted, and using his strength to protect rather than to dominate. Shadow integration tool, the power reclamation, weekly practice. Identify one area where you're being too passive or accommodating. Ask, what am I afraid will happen if I assert myself here? How is my buried power trying to emerge? What would healthy aggression look like in this situation? Master level. You can access your aggressive energy consciously, using it to create, protect, and achieve without harming others or yourself. Type 3. Sexual shadow. The aliveness you learned was shameful. What it looks like. Suppressed sensuality that creates disconnection from your body. Buried desire that manifests as chronic wanting without satisfaction. Hidden pleasure that results in addiction or compulsion. Disowned magnetism that becomes neediness or invisibility. The psychological reality. Sexual energy isn't just about sex, it's about life force, creativity, magnetism, and pleasure. When you bury this energy, you become disconnected from your body, your desires, and your natural charisma. Case study. Gabriella grew up in a religious household where sexuality was associated with sin and shame. She learned to bury not just her sexual desires, but her entire relationship with pleasure, sensuality, and embodied aliveness. By age 40, Gabriella felt like she was living from the neck up. She was successful professionally, but felt no joy in her accomplishments, no pleasure in her relationships, no connection to her body or desires. When Gabriella began excavating her sexual shadow, she wasn't becoming promiscuous, she was becoming alive. She started dancing, wearing clothes that felt good on her skin, eating foods for pleasure rather than just nutrition, and allowing herself to want things without immediately judging the wanting. The integration practice. Gabriella learned to distinguish between healthy sexuality and compulsive sexuality. She began treating pleasure as information about what brought her alive rather than something to be guilty about. Shadow integration tool, pleasure reclamation. Daily practice. Ask yourself, what would feel good in my body right now? What desire am I judging instead of exploring? How can I honor my life force energy today? Master level, you're connected to your sexual creative energy without being controlled by it. You can experience pleasure without guilt and desire without compulsion. Type 4. Creative shadow. The uniqueness you learned was too much. What it looks like. Suppressed creativity that becomes chronic dissatisfaction. Buried uniqueness that results in conformity and depression. Hidden artistic impulses that manifest as criticism of others' creativity. Disowned originality that becomes imitation and emptiness. The psychological reality. Your creative shadow contains your unique contribution to the world. When you bury it, You not only deprive yourself of fulfillment, you deprive the world of what only you can create. Case study. Victor was a naturally artistic child who loved to draw, write, and make music. But his practical family constantly sent the message that creativity was nice as a hobby, but not serious work. Victor buried his creative shadow so deeply that by age 35, he couldn't even remember what he used to love creating. Feeling a chronic sense that something was missing, but unable to identify what. When Victor excavated his creative shadow, he didn't quit his job to become a starving artist. He began creating for the pure joy of creation. He started drawing again, not to become professional, but to reconnect with the part of himself that saw beauty and wanted to make it visible. The integration practice. Victor learned that creativity isn't about becoming an artist, it's about engaging with life as a creative act. He brought creativity to his accounting work, his relationships, his cooking, his problem-solving. Shadow integration tool, the creative excavation weekly practice. What did I love creating as a child that I've abandoned? What would I create if no one would ever see it? How can I approach one area of my life more creatively? Master level. You engage with life as a creative act, bringing originality and innovation to whatever you do, whether or not it's creative work. Type 5. Spiritual shadow. The wisdom you learned was arrogant to claim what it looks like. Suppressed intuition that becomes chronic confusion. Buried wisdom that results in constantly seeking external guidance. Hidden spiritual experiences that manifest as feeling crazy or different. Disowned inner knowing that becomes dependency on others' opinions. The psychological reality. Your spiritual shadow contains your direct access to wisdom, intuition, and meaning. When you bury it, you become dependent on external authorities for answers that you actually carry within yourself. Case study. Indira had powerful intuitive experiences as a child, dreams that came true, strong feelings about people that proved accurate, a sense of connection to something larger than herself. But her rational scientific family taught her these experiences were imagination or coincidence. Indira buried her spiritual shadow so completely that by age 30, she couldn't make decisions without asking multiple people for advice. She'd lost access to her inner knowing and felt spiritually empty despite trying various religions and practices. When Indira excavated her spiritual shadow, she didn't become a mystic or guru. She reconnected with her natural intuition and inner wisdom. She began trusting her gut feelings, honoring her unusual experiences, and accessing guidance from within rather than constantly seeking it outside herself. The integration practice. Indira learned to distinguish between genuine spiritual insight and spiritual ego. She began honoring her inner knowing while staying grounded in practical reality. Shadow integration tool, the wisdom reclamation daily practice. What do I know that I'm pretending not to know? What inner guidance am I dismissing as just my imagination? How can I honor my spiritual experiences without spiritual ego? Master level. You access your inner wisdom naturally while remaining grounded, practical, and humble. You trust your intuition without abandoning critical thinking. The 21-Day Shadow Integration Protocol. Unlike the previous episode's protocols, shadow work requires a longer integration period because you're rewiring decades of conditioning. This 21-day protocol moves through 3 phases: recognition, excavation, and integration. Week 1. Shadow recognition, identifying what you've buried. Day 1 to 3. The mirror practice. Purpose: using your triggers to identify your shadows. Daily exercise. When someone irritates, triggers, or fascinates you, ask, what quality in this person am I judging? Do I have this quality in a buried or disowned form? How might this quality serve me if I integrated it consciously? Example: if someone's selfishness triggers you, explore, where have I buried my ability to prioritize my own needs? How might healthy self-care serve me? Day 4 to 5. The childhood archaeology purpose. Identifying which parts of you learned to hide. Exercise. Reflect on your childhood messages. What parts of my personality were criticized, punished, or ignored? What natural impulses did I learn were bad or wrong? What aspects of myself did I exile to gain love and acceptance? Day 6 to 7. The energy audit purpose. Noticing where your energy is leaking through shadow expression. Exercise. Track your energy leaks. When do you feel drained or depleted? What passive-aggressive behaviors do you notice in yourself? Where does buried energy show up as obsession, addiction, or compulsion? Week 2. Shadow excavation. Carefully unearthing what you have buried. You've come far already. If you're still watching this, it means your unconscious is ready for change. Pause. Breathe. You're about to meet a part of yourself you've buried for decades. This is where most people turn back, not because the work gets harder, but because it gets real. Now we dig. Day 8 to 10. Emotional shadow dialogue. Purpose: reconnecting with buried emotions. Exercise. Choose one emotion you've learned to suppress: anger, sadness, fear. Write a dialogue with this emotion. You. Why have I been afraid of you? Emotion. Because. You. What do you need me to know? Emotion. I need you to understand that. Day 11 to 12. Power shadow reclamation. Purpose: accessing buried strength and assertion. Exercise. Identify one area where you're being overly passive or accommodating. Practice small acts of healthy assertion. Say no without over-explaining. 13 to 14. Express a preference. Clearly sexual. Shadow express on for something you want. Exercise. Engage in an activity that feels alive and pleasurable. Create something for pure joy. No productivity goal. Move your body in a way that feels good. Engage your senses fully in some experience. Express desire without immediately judging it. Week 3. Shadow integration. Consciously incorporating your reclaimed power. Stop. Look how far you've come. 2 weeks ago, your shadow was your enemy. Now you're learning to make it your ally. This final week isn't about more digging. It's about rebuilding yourself from the treasures you found. Integration is the final phase of excavation. You've not only found the ruins of your authentic self, you're about to rebuild the temple from the same stones they once buried. Day 15 to 17. Shadow consciousness training. Propose. Learning to express shadow qualities consciously rather than reactively. Exercise. When you notice shadow energy arising, anger, desire, creativity, power, pause and ask, how can I express this energy consciously rather than suppressing or exploding it? What would healthy expression of this energy look like? How can I use this energy to create rather than destroy? Day 18 to 19, Shadow Boundary Work. Purpose: using integrated shadow energy to create and maintain boundaries. Exercise. Practice using your reclaimed power to protect your energy from draining people or situations, assert your needs without aggression. Create space for your authentic expression. Say yes to what aligns with your integrated self. Day 20 to 21. Shadow Integration Mastery. Purpose: living for your whole self rather than your approved self. Exercise. For 2 days, practice showing up as your integrated self. Include your shadows in your self-concept. Express the full range of your humanity appropriately. Use your reclaimed energy in service of your authentic life. Notice how integration affects your relationships and energy. The alchemy. What happens when you integrate your shadow? Shadow integration isn't about becoming your dark side. It's about becoming whole. When you reclaim your disowned aspects, something alchemical happens. Your buried weaknesses become conscious strengths. The energy transformation. Suppressed anger becomes assertive power. Buried sadness becomes emotional depth and empathy. Hidden sexuality becomes creative life force. Disowned aggression becomes protective strength. Buried spirituality becomes inner wisdom. Consider the transformation of Fatima, who completed a full shadow integration process over 6 months. Before integration: chronically nice, never said no, constantly depleted, emotionally flat, couldn't access anger or strong feelings, sexually shut down, no connection to desire or pleasure, creatively blocked, couldn't access originality or inspiration, spiritually empty, constantly seeking external guidance. During integration, began expressing anger appropriately, setting boundaries, allowed herself to feel deeply, including difficult emotions, reconnected with her body, sexuality, and capacity for pleasure, started creating art again, accessing her unique voice, developed trust in her inner knowing and intuition after integration. Energetically vital, able to say yes and no from authenticity. Emotionally intelligent, able to feel without being overwhelmed. Sexually alive, connected to life force and creative energy, creatively fulfilled, expressing her uniqueness in multiple areas. Spiritually grounded, accessing wisdom from within. Fatima's reflection. I thought shadow work would make me a darker person. Instead, it made me a complete person. I'm not nicer than I used to be, I'm more real. And somehow, being real creates more authentic connections than being nice ever did. The relationship revolution. When you integrate your shadow, your relationships transform because you're no longer relating from just your approved parts. You're relating from your whole self. Shallow relationships based on your performance naturally fade away. Deep relationships based on authentic connection become possible. New relationships with people who appreciate your wholeness emerge. The creative explosion. Integrated shadow energy becomes available for creativity, innovation, and authentic expression. You're no longer using your life force to suppress parts. of yourself. That energy becomes available for creation. The spiritual maturation. True spiritual development includes shadow integration. You can't transcend what you haven't first integrated. Spiritual bypassing, using spirituality to avoid psychological work, keeps you stuck in partial development. Integrated spirituality includes your humanity rather than trying to escape it. The resistance. Why your psyche fights shadow integration. Shadow integration triggers powerful resistance because you're undoing years of psychological conditioning designed to keep you safe through conformity. The identity dissolution, terror. What it feels like. If I'm not the nice person, strong person, rational person I've always been, who am I? The psychology. Your ego identity is built on disowning certain aspects of yourself. When you begin integrating these aspects, your sense of self becomes temporarily unstable. The integration response. I'm not losing myself, I'm becoming myself. My identity is expanding to include my wholeness rather than just my approved parts. The social rejection fear. What it feels like. People won't love me if they see my anger, sexuality, power, weirdness. The psychology. You originally buried these aspects because they threatened relationships. Your nervous system still believes integration equals abandonment. Integration response. The people who can't handle my wholeness aren't my people. I'd rather be alone as myself than surrounded by people who only love my performance. The moral superiority addiction. What it feels like. I'm a good person because I don't have expressed these negative qualities. The psychology, your sense of being good, depends on disowning parts of your humanity. Integration threatens your moral identity. The integration response. True goodness includes wholeness, not perfection. I can be ethical while being human. The control illusion, what it feels like. If I let these energies out, I'll lose control and hurt people. The psychology. You believe suppression equals control, but suppressed energy often leaks out destructively. Integration actually creates more conscious control. The integration response. Conscious expression of shadow energy is more controlled than unconscious suppression and explosion. The spiritual bypassing pattern, what it feels like. Spiritual evolved. People don't have these lower impulses. The psychology. Using spirituality to avoid psychological integration keeps you stuck in partial development. The integration response. True spiritual maturity includes psychological integration. I can't transcend what I haven't first integrated. Advanced shadow integration practices. Once you've completed the basic 21-day protocol, these advanced practices help you maintain and deepen your shadow integration. The daily shadow check-in morning integration. 5 minutes. What aspects of myself am I avoiding today? How can I include my whole self in today's interactions? What shadow energy is available for creative use today? Evening integration review. 5 minutes. When did I suppress my shadow today? When did I express it consciously? What did I learn about my integrated self today? How did shadow integration affect my relationships and energy? The weekly shadow dialogue. Choose one aspect of your shadow each week and have a written dialogue. You. How have you been trying to serve me this week? Shadow aspect. I've been. You. What do you need from me? Shadow aspect. I need you too. You. How can we work together rather than against each other? The monthly shadow expansion. Each month, identify one new area where you're still suppressing shadow energy. What aspect of your personality are you still hiding? What energy are you still afraid to express? What part of your power are you still disowning? The relationship shadow mirror. Use your closest relationships as shadow integration laboratories. With your partner, practice expressing your needs, desires, and boundaries. With family, practice maintaining your integrated self under pressure. With friends, practice showing your authentic complexity. At work, practice professional integration of your personal power. The creative shadow expression. Channel shadow energy into creative outlets. Angry energy. Intense art, music, writing, or physical expression. Sexual energy. Sensual creativity, beautiful making, artistic passion. Power energy. Leadership, competitive creation, ambitious projects. Emotional energy, deep artistic expression, empathetic creation. Spiritual energy, meaningful work, wisdom sharing, sacred creativity. Living as an integrated being. After months of shadow integration, you reach what Jung called individuation, becoming a complete, integrated individual rather than a collection of approved parts. Daily reality of integration. You wake up knowing you're human, complete with light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, approved and disowned aspects. You don't try to be perfect. You try to be real. Relationship reality. Your connections are based on authentic compatibility rather than mutual performance. You attract people who appreciate your complexity and release people who need you to be simple. Creative reality. Your creative expression has depth, authenticity, and power because it emerges from your whole self rather than your approved self. Professional reality. You bring your integrated self to work, your power, creativity, emotional intelligence, and wisdom rather than just your professional persona. Spiritual reality. Your spiritual life includes your humanity rather than trying to transcend it. You're grounded in earth while reaching toward transcendence. The integration mastery signs. You know you've achieved shadow integration mastery when you can access anger without being controlled by it. You can feel sadness without being overwhelmed by it. You can express sexuality without guilt or compulsion. You can use power without becoming aggressive. You can access creativity without fear of judgment. You can trust intuition without abandoning logic. Most importantly, you can be disliked for who you are rather than loved for who you're pretending to be. Your shadow integration conclusion. You came to episode 4 thinking your shadows were your problems. You're leaving understanding they're your buried treasures. Like any archaeological expedition, shadow integration is about excavation, preservation, and reconstruction. You didn't just dig up random artifacts, you discovered the sacred relics of your authentic power that were buried to keep you safe, small, and acceptable. Here's what you've excavated. Your shadow isn't your dark side, it's your disowned power. Integration beats suppression. Conscious expression versus unconscious leakage. The 21-day protocol: recognition, excavation, integration. Your triggers reveal your buried gold. What you judge end in others, you have disowned in yourself. The archaeological truth: integration is the final phase of excavation. You've not only found the ruins of your authentic self, you've rebuilt the temple from the same stones they once buried. What to do right now? Identify one shadow aspect you're ready to reclaim. Start the recognition phase. Notice where your energy leaks. Use your triggers as teachers. They are showing you buried power. Stop now and ask yourself one question. What part of yourself have you been most afraid to let others see? Write it down, then ask, what if this isn't your weakness? What if it's your hidden power? If you're ready to integrate at least one part of your shadow, write in the comments what you discovered about yourself. What aspect are you ready to reclaim? All integration protocols are here in this video. If you're just joining us, start with episode 1, links in the description. If this episode revealed something important to you, stay with me. Tomorrow, we explore how to build authentic relationships from your integrated self. You've excavated your authentic self, learned to protect it, and integrated your shadows. But there's one more crucial skill: learning to love and be loved as your whole, integrated self. Tomorrow we explore the architecture of authentic relationships, how to connect deeply without losing yourself. Join the archaeological expedition. Hit subscribe and the bell, because you can't live authentically until you reclaim all of yourself. Your shadow is no longer your enemy. It's your integrated strength. Time to learn how to love and be loved as your complete self. Until tomorrow, embrace your wholeness, become your full self.